What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another edition of the Quick Bricks NBA DFS podcast, brought to you by the good guys over at Fantasy Degens. As always, Sean Mitchell here at SMitchell17 on the Twitter machine. Hopefully everybody's enjoying your holiday. This is a special 6-game slate today here, the day after Christmas. Had a nice little 5-gamer all day yesterday. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Had a nice Christmas with your family. Continue to enjoy your holiday time off here. With that being said, let's hop right into this. Of course, like I said, we got a 6-gamer here on tap for tonight. A couple games that I really like. Obviously, we're going to start with the Wizards at the Pistons, with Detroit coming in as a 5.5-point road favorite here, home favorite. 227 on the total. That one actually went down like 5 points since last night. Last night that was 231 and a half. Excuse me. So that one's pretty interesting to see that kind of a number drop. Both teams are kind of struggling with injuries. Wizards are without, Rui. They're without Thomas Bryant. They're without Davis, Bertans. They're they're really injured, needless to say. The Pistons are kind of dealing with their own injuries. Luke Kennard is injured. Bruce Brown is questionable. Looks like Blake Griffin will play. So this game obviously is is going to be the one that we're going to have to watch and see what the news is like. Has a couple good spots in it. We know the pace is going to be up. Over the last 5 games, Washington is 13th in terms of pace. Over the last 5. Detroit 19th. Next game we're going to go to is the Knicks at the Nets. Brooklyn comes in as a home favorite of 7.5 here, 220 and a half. I'm sorry, 222 and a half. Let me get this one straight. 222 and a half on the total. New York Knicks coming in as the 12th fastest team over their last 5. Brooklyn, the 4th. The Knicks one is the one that really surprised me. They've been in the top 15 here over the last week and a half, which is pretty interesting. They've been actually turned into more of an aggressive team, I guess, with the new coach. They've been attacking the basket a little bit more. Julius Randle has really been picking it up. RJ Barrett's been playing well. Alfred Payton's been playing good. So this one is obviously an interesting matchup as well. So the ugly thing about this slate is that 3 of the totals and 3 of the games do not have totals, and 2 of them don't have spreads, it looks like. So next game on the docket, we have Spurs at the Mavericks, which this one, of course, we know why there is no spread or total on this game. Looking to see if Luka Doncic will make his coveted return tonight after missing 2 weeks or so with a sprained ankle. That one's interesting because San Antonio is ranked 2nd in terms of pace over the last 5 games. Really surprising. They've been running with a lot of pace lately. Dallas is 14th. Luka is one of the big reasons why they ran with so much pace beforehand. And they've still, hung around, but they were like in the top 10 there for a little bit with Luka, at the helm. This one will be an interesting one. We'll have to wait and kind of see the news surrounding Luka on that one. 4th game on the night is the Grizzlies at the Thunder. We get a little rematch. This game happened about 4 games ago. Memphis coming in as the 10th fastest over the last 5. OKC 17th. No spread or total on that game. T-Wolves at the Kings. We have Sacramento coming in here as a home favorite of 4.5 points. No total on this one. Waiting to see Karl Anthony Towns news. Minnesota is 6th in terms of pace over the last 5. Sacramento 27th. Sacramento is not a fast team. They've not been a fast team all year. De'Aaron Fox, even though he is as fast as he is, this team just doesn't really run with a lot of pace. That's just not their identity. Needless to say, that is a major pace-up spot for Sacramento, with Minnesota coming to town. Last game on the night, the big late-night hammer, you have the Blazers, the Portland Trail Blazers going into the Utah Jazz to take on the Jazz. Utah minus 5.5 here at home, 219.5 on the total. Portland 7th in terms of pace over the last 5. Utah 20th. Utah has kind of fallen back to the norm. They were up in the top 12-ish for a little bit. Now they're kind of falling back to where the median. Portland continues to run with pace. They are a very fast-paced team. Their 2 guards are very fast. This is a really interesting game. It's got almost a 220 total. It's in Utah, so a lot of people will likely think, oh man, Utah, dreaded pace, not very fast. That's not the case this year, especially without Mike Conley. They just added Jordan Clarkson for some guard depth there, so that one's going to be interesting to kind of see how that shakes out, to see what kind of minutes he's going to get. So that is kind of a rundown of the games, the spreads, totals, and the pace over the last 5 games. Let's go ahead and hop right into the point guard spot. Obviously, Luka Doncic at 11.8 is very scary if you're going to even consider playing him if he plays tonight. Now, don't get me wrong. If he comes in with no designation, full load of minutes, I highly doubt that that's going to be the case. So more than likely, it's going to be a fade for me anyways, and I'll just eat it if he goes off and smashes. That's just not going to really be something that I want to play at almost $12,000 on a 6-game slate. So that's kind of where I am on Doncic. I will easily go down to Spencer Dinwiddie at 8.7. He's going to get Elfrid Payton defense. He's put up 40 or more in his last 8 of 10. Over 45 fantasy points in his last 3. He's averaging 43.6 fantasy points in his last 5 at home. And he's also garnering a 32.8% usage rate in his last 5 at home as well. Continues to play really well without Kyrie. It's a good spot. He's at home where he typically plays better. So Spencer Dinwiddie is easily my favorite point guard spot on tonight's slate. Chris Paul at 7.2 comes in next. Memphis versus point guard has been a thing. They've struggled against them all season long. He put up 33 fantasy points in this same meeting, like I said, 3 games ago. He just came off of a 60.5 point fantasy game against Chicago, his last game out. Memphis, of course, allowing the 10th most fantasy points to that point guard spot over the last 5 games, and they've been in the top 10 all year long. Of course, like I said, it's a good spot for Memphis. It'll be a pace-up spot for OKC, and CP3 has dominated this matchup already. So it's a good spot, decent price. I'm totally fine with CP3. De'Aaron Fox at 7K. The price is down. He's played 30 minutes or more in his last 4 or 5. I'm totally fine with playing De'Aaron Fox here at 7K. I think it's a great price. Actually, I think it's really rather cheap. Minnesota is allowing the 9th most fantasy points to that point guard spot over the last 5. We've been fading Minnesota point guard spot all season long. It's going to continue to happen. Jeff Teague is just not a great defender. The only thing that I can think of is if they start Shabazz Napier, and still yet, who's going to guard Buddy Hield then? I'm fine with Fox. I really like the price here at 7K. 30 minutes or more in all but 1 game this whole season. Like I said, he's played 30 or more in his last 4 or 5. Just put up 52.3 fantasy points last game against Houston. Of course, everybody puts up big games against Houston because it's just a track meet. Nonetheless, 37 or more in his last 3 or 4 since returning. And, of course, almost a 27% usage rate over his last 4 as well. So De'Aaron Fox is getting back into the swing of things. He's getting his minutes back. He's starting to produce again. And his price is just still too short. So we're going to definitely be playing some De'Aaron Fox. Dennis Schroeder at 6.6 has been playing amazingly lately. Over 43 or more in his last 3. Over 34 fantasy points in his last 6 of 7 games. He leads the team in usage. He's had a 30.4% usage rate in his last 5 games. Gets a good spot here, of course, against Memphis. I'm totally fine with Dennis Schroeder again. Jalen Brunson at 6.5, of course, if no Luka Doncic, should see another good role as he has over his last 5 to 6 games. He's played over 31 minutes in his last 4 or 5. He's put up 38, 29, and 42 fantasy points in those last 4. He's only garnered a 19.7% usage rate over his last 4, but he's carrying a 109.8 offensive rating, a 48.7 assist percentage, and a 6.5 overall rebound percentage. So he's getting it done, in multiple facets of the game. He's dishing out assists. He's grabbing a few rebounds. He's scoring really good. Jalen Brunson is just, one of your all-around top great point guards. I shouldn't say great. I should just say he's just really good all around. He's got smooth edges. He's a good team player, and like I said, he's not selfish. He's not going to take all the shots himself. And he dishes out a lot of good stuff. So Jalen Brunson at 6.5, I think, is totally fine against San Antonio. Derrick Rose at 6.4. Washington allowing the number 1 most fantasy points to that point guard spot over the last 5. They've been terrible against it. They've been terrible against about every spot. It is Washington. This is a game we're going to look to target as many spots as we can. No Luke Kennard. Obviously, without Kennard and without Bruce Brown Jr., that raises Derrick Rose's usage rate to a smooth 32.4%. So without those 2 guys on the floor, Derrick Rose is the usage king. He's going to take a lot of shots. He's going to want the ball. I really like Derrick Rose at 6.4. Over 30 fantasy points in his last 7 of 8 games. Over 35 fantasy points in his last 4 of 7. So Derrick Rose has been playing well. He's been taking over that role since those guys have been out, and he's been playing really well in it. So Derrick Rose 6.4, totally fine. Ish Smith at 6.1. IT is out again for his 2nd game of the 2-game suspension. 30.5 fantasy points last game, 25 or more minutes we should expect. The only thing that we're looking at is Gary Payton Jr., or Gary Payton 2, I should say, who they just signed literally before last game. He came in his debut. He played 34 minutes. He put up 44.3 fantasy points. Now, do I think that this is sustainable? And by the way, he's 5.7K tonight. Ish is 6.1. Ish is going to be the starter. Gary Payton will likely spell him off the bench. I'm not really sure why Gary Payton got so much run in his first game. It's more so the simple fact that Washington is depleted. They don't have very many people behind. If Bruce Brown plays, I'm not a fan of Gary Payton because obviously he's going to play his usual 24 to 28 minutes. Ish Smith is going to play his usual 25 to 30 minutes. Gary Payton might see 20 to 22. Would be my guess. I don't believe he'll see 34 again. I don't believe that he will be able to carry a 122.2 offensive rating with a 31.3 assist percentage and a 15.3% rebound percentage with 12.7% usage rate. That's really impressive to be able to do what he did with only a 12.7% usage rate in a game where he played 34 minutes and he put up 44.3 fantasy points. So do I think that's sustainable? Absolutely not. Do I think that he gets 20 to 25 fantasy points? It's realistic, but do you want to play? His price has jumped literally due to what he did last game. So don't chase the points. If Bruce Brown is out, I would consider playing some Gary Payton just because of the matchup, just because of the game flow. It's one of the highest total games on the board at the moment. It is the highest total on the board. Nonetheless, again, if Bruce Brown plays, that's going to take away some of his playing time, I would assume. So that's kind of my thoughts on the Ish and Gary Payton situation. Elfrid Payton at 5.3, over 30 fantasy points in his last 3 of 5. Brooklyn allowing the 9th most fantasy points to that point guard spot over the last 5. He's played 30 and 27 minutes in his last 2. He hasn't been exactly consistent as far as the minutes goes, but the 30 and 27 in his last 2 are very encouraging. He's been playing really well. Like I said, over 30 fantasy points in his last 3 of 5. He's been putting up good numbers. It is a good spot against Brooklyn. So Elf Payton at 5.3, I'm totally fine with. Derrick White at 4.1, over 20 fantasy points in his last 4 games. He's put up 25, 20.3, 31.3, and 28 fantasy points in his last 4. 21 or more minutes in every single game, but 1 this season. He's a flyer play. We've seen a little bit of upside when he flashed it with 31.3, so we know it's there. That's about a 7.5x return on your value there if you're playing him at 4K. So totally fine with Derrick White if you want to look at him. Seth Curry and Tyus Jones down here at the bottom. Curry being 3.6. If Doncic is out again, he should likely get some decent run. We've seen the upside with him in extended run periods. He's put up 50.3, 38.3, and 29 fantasy points with extended run, playing 25 plus minutes. If he happens to get that kind of run, he could be looking at easily 30 plus fantasy points at 3.6. So Curry is one to look at. Tyus Jones again at 3.4. He's put up 20.8 and 26.8 in his last 2 games. He's scored in double figures, real points in his last 2 with at least 3 rebounds and 3 or more assists. So Tyus Jones has been playing pretty decent off the bench. Of course, gets a great spot here against OKC against Dennis Schroeder in that second unit. So 3.4 on Tyus Jones, I'm totally fine with. Moving over to the shooting guard spot, Brad Beal at 9.9. Detroit, it's of course without one of their better defenders in Luke Kennard. This is really bad for them because Beal, it could potentially just feast on this defense all night long. 37 or more minutes in his last 5 of 6, 33.7% usage rate in his last 5. He's went for 50 or more fantasy points in 4 of his last 6. So Brad Beal, no need to really go any further. We know he's a good spot. He is almost 10K, so that's up to you. Donovan Mitchell at 8.1. His price is up there still, but Portland allowing the 6th most fantasy points to the shooting guard spot over the last 5. They're both terrible against the shooting guard, power forward, small forward, point guard. I mean, the only spot that they're not terrible against is the center spot because of Hassan Whiteside. Portland is just not a very good defensive team. They play with a lot of pace, so they give up a lot of points as well in return. Donovan Mitchell at home, it's a prime spot. 35 or more minutes in his last 7, 34.1% usage rate over his last 5 at home, over 40 fantasy points in his last 6 of 7 games. So Don Mitchell is in a great spot. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander at 6.7, over 40 fantasy points in his last 3, 34 more minutes in his last 6. Just put up 40.3 fantasy points against Memphis 3 games ago. 22.5% usage rate over his last 5. So SGA has been getting it done as well. He's been lighting it up again. He kind of is a streaky player. He's on a hot streak, so it's up to you. But over 40 fantasy points in his last 3 is a pretty good number. Buddy Hield seems like a nice buy low here for him at 6.3 over on DraftKings. It's he's still taking a lot of shots. His usage rate is still fine. In his last 2 home games before the last game against Houston, which everybody thought he would smash in, and he only put up like 19 fantasy points. He's literally put up like 18 and 19 in his last 2. But if you look at his last 2 home games before that, he put up 44.3 and 56.5. So do I think this is a buy low spot? Absolutely. And I love Buddy Hield in tournaments, and I will be playing him in some tournaments. He's at home, of course. Like I said, it's a good spot. And this is just too cheap of a price to not play a little bit of Buddy Hield in tournaments if you're playing multiples. Tim Hardaway Jr. at 5.6, 36 or more in his last 3 of 5, 36.5, 38.5, and 40.3 in those 3. He's taken at least 17 or more field goal attempts in his last 3 games. He's put up at least 13 or more real points in his last 3. And of course, if there's no Luka Doncic again, you're going to have to fire up Tim Hardaway Jr. San Antonio is not exactly terrible against the small forward spot with DDR there, but I'm totally fine with, or the shooting guard spot, whatever you want to call it. But THJ has literally been eating up the usage without Doncic. Him and Kristaps have been playing really well. And at 5.6, if he's going to take 17 or more field goal attempts without Doncic, I want a piece. So Tim Hardaway Jr. is there. Going over to the small forward spot, DeMar DeRozan at 6.5. I don't believe I'm playing Wiggins at 7.8. I think it's just too expensive of a price. He hasn't been producing as well lately. And if Karl Anthony Towns comes back, I'm definitely not going to be playing him at 7.8. So DeMar DeRozan at 6.5. On the flip side, of course, here I think is a great price at 6.5. 51.3 fantasy points last game against Memphis. Dallas is allowing the most fantasy points to the small forward spot over their last 5 games. He's played 30 minutes a game or more in every single game. He's put up over 30 fantasy points in all but 2 games this season. So DDR is going to continue to play well. He's going to continue to get 30-plus minutes, and he's probably going to continue to put up 30 more fantasy points, which is at value what you need right now. He's playing at home. He's got a – oh, no, sorry. They're in Dallas. Nonetheless, it's a good spot. He actually has shown up pretty good on the road. And like I said, he's fresh out of a 51-point fantasy game, and his price is $6.5K. So you be the judge. Joe Ingles at 6.2 continues to get great run with with Utah struggling with no point guard. Moutier is not getting it done. Joe Ingles has literally been the point guard. He's 6.2. We know Portland is terrible against shooting guard, small forward, point guard. They're allowing the actual 4th most fantasy points to the small forward spot. I believe it was 6th most to the shooting guard spot over the last 5 as well. So, yeah, Joe Ingles in a great spot. He's played 34 more minutes in his last 7. He's put up over 30 fantasy points in his last 7 of 8. Just put up 39.5 fantasy points last game against a really good Miami team. So, Joe Ingles going to continue to get good run. I'm not really sure how Clarkson fits in this rotation. Hopefully it is not for Ingles. Hopefully it is to maybe spell, maybe Moutier is going to be getting kicked to the curb, and maybe he'll spell a little bit of Don Mitchell, or I don't know. I'm not really sure, but I'm still totally fine with Joe Ingles. Troy Brown Jr. Missed his big game. He's 6.2 tonight. Detroit allowing the 2nd most fantasy points to the small forward spot over the last 5. Noah Kennard is really good for him. 32 minutes last game, 52.8 fantasy points. He's now put up 23 or more fantasy points in his last 6 to 7. Obviously, his price jumped up like $600 because of his last game. If you look at his game logs, he really has not produced that well. He's literally been in that 23 to 27 fantasy point range for his last 6 to 7 games. Then he explodes for this game, and his price jumps up to 6.2 from like 5.5, 5.6. So it's kind of a chase if you want to chase, but it couldn't be a better spot. Couldn't be against a better team and a better flow. So Troy Brown Jr. I'm fine with at 6.2. Joe Harris at 5.7. New York allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to the small forward spot over their last 5. He's put up 35.3 and 39.5 in his last 2 of 3. He only has had an 18.9% usage rate in his last 5 games, but the dude's shooting 61.2% true shooting percentage. He's just one of the best shooters in the game. Joe Harris finds ways to score. He's a great shooter. Over on DraftKings, he definitely has more value for his three-point upside. So I'm totally fine with Joe Harris tonight at 5.7. Dorian Finney-Smith at 4.4 is, I think, a guy you can look at again. Of course, if this is all with no Luka. I just don't see them rushing Luka back into play. I could be totally wrong on this. It just seems really rather fast. And I don't think that they want to rush him back in. But nonetheless, Dorian Finney-Smith is still going to see his regular minutes. His his production might just go down a little bit. He's only 4.4. He's put up 30, 23.3, 27.5, and 25.3 fantasy points in his last 4. He's played over 30 minutes in his last 7 games. So, Dorian Finney-Smith is just one of those nice filler spots that you will need to play to fit some of your other guys. So he's there. Trevor Ariza at 4K is also another one. He put up 33.5 and 24.5 in his last 2. Played 24 more minutes in his last 9 of 10. He's been playing well since he returned as well. His floor is kind of low, though, so it's iffy, but he is a tournament play. Damian Dotson, I mentioned last time to somebody, I can't remember who I was asking or talking to. I think it was me and John on the Fantasy Alarm Pod. We had talked about Damian Dotson in the fact that if Marcus Morris sat. Marcus Morris is dealing with an Achilles injury, which is never good. Achilles injuries suck. So in the event that Marcus Morris happens to sit once again, Damian Dotson played 27 minutes last game, put up 28.5 fantasy points. Gets a good spot here against Brooklyn, so if you want to do that, totally fine looking at some Damian Dotson. Moving over to the power forward spot. Let's see here. At the power forward spot, we got it kicked off with Kristaps Porzingis at 8.3. Of course, if no Doncic, it's going to make it an even better play. It's going to be really hard to play him at 8.3 if he does play. But he's put up over 50 fantasy points in his last 4 or 5, 33 or more minutes in his last 6, 27.6% usage rate over his last 5, and San Antonio is allowing these 6 most fantasy points to the power forward spot over the last 5 games. So great spot for KP, hopefully no Luka. On the flip side, LaMarcus Aldridge at 7.4 at almost 1,000 cheaper. Dallas is allowing the 7th most fantasy points to that power forward spot over their last 5 as well. He's fresh off a 65.8 fantasy game against Memphis. He's put up 40 or more in his last 3 or 4, 37 or more in his last 3 on the road, garnering right at 23.5% usage rate over his last 5 on the road as well. LMA's been playing really well. Really like him tonight. Julius Randle at 6'8". Brooklyn against bigs is a big thing, obviously. They're allowing the 10th most fantasy points to the power forward spot over the last 5. In the center spot, they've also been getting crushed at all season long. So Julius Randle, once again, at a good spot. Like I said, he's been attacking a lot more lately. He's fresh off a 50.8 fantasy game last game against Washington. Washington's terrible. We know that. But he's also put up 33 or more in his last 6 or 7. Of course, it's Brooklyn versus bigs. So it's a good spot for Randle. Really like him as well. Bojan Bogdanovich at 6.7. He's going to get mellow defense here. 40.5, 48.3 fantasy points in his last 2 at home. 27.2% usage rate in his last 5. Over 30 minutes in all but 1 game. Bojan is one of those. He's going to continue to get the minutes. He's going to continue to see floor time. He's going to continue to get nice usage rate, and he puts up numbers. So totally fine with Bojan. Jaren Jackson Jr. at 6.5. Over 30 fantasy points in his last 3. Over 18 or more real points in his last 3. Over 31 minutes in his last 4 or 5. Did not play very well in this 3 games ago against OKC. Only put up like 19.5 fantasy points, and I think he got into foul trouble early. Hopefully he can avoid that. Down low against Steven Adams, I'm guessing, is probably where that bottleneck happened. Nonetheless, he's still very viable if he's going to see 30-plus minutes. Carmelo Anthony at 5.8. Over fantasy points in his last 2 on the road. 38.8, 35, 46, and 41 fantasy points in his last 4 or 5. A smidge under 25% at 24.5% usage rate in his last 5 on the road. Melo's been playing well, been putting up good numbers as well. Marvin Bagley, if you want to go that route, at 5.3. His mins have been really inconsistent. But nonetheless, he's put up over 30 fantasy points in his last 2 of 3. Even in seeing 22 to 25 minutes. Hopefully his minutes will go up as he's been, he's played 4 or 5 games now at smaller minutes. So hopefully they up him tonight, and at 5.3, I think I'll be a fan. Moving over to the center spot, Karl Anthony Towns. Great matchup with Sacramento, obviously, if he's back in a full go. Don't really have to extend much on him because I want all the Drummond that I can get at 10K. It's total smash spot. Washington has been awful against the center spot all year long. Drummond at home. You can't really get a better matchup here. Could be without Bruce Brown, could be without Luke Kennard. The only really ones he'll have to deal with is Blake Griffin and Derrick Rose trying to steal his usage rate. Nonetheless, Drummond is still going to continue to be heavily involved. It's the best matchup on the board. I'm going to be probably 100% Drummond. Rudy Gobert, I just don't really think I can pay 8.9 for him at home, even though he has been totally smashing lately. He's put up a double-double in every single game except one on the season. He's put up over 41 fantasy points in his last 9 games. Put up a couple of 50-pointers in there. But at 8.9, you're going to need 45 or more fantasy points just for value. So, although he has done that, he hasn't done it but for more than 3 or 4 or 5 games out of those 9. So it's kind of up to you if you want to play him at home. I mean, it is where he plays better, but he's going to have to deal with Hassan down low, and it's not a great spot. I would honestly rather go down to Hassan at 7.7. 35 and 60 in his last 2 road games. 33 over 33 in his last 5 on the road, out of his last 5 of 6 on the road, and over 30 minutes or more in his last 6. Hassan, we didn't think he would be this kind of a minutes person. He's been, a player, I should say. He's been getting good run. He's been putting up big numbers. This is not the best spot against Rudy at home, but Rudy is not the same defender that he's been in prior years. So I think you can take the price reduction here on Hassan at 7.7, especially in tournaments. Really like it. Steven Adams, of course, at 6.4 is also another play that I think is cash worthy. 51.3 last game against the Clippers. The Clippers are terrible against the center spot. We know that. But he did put up 33 fantasy points in this same game against Memphis 3 games ago. He's put up over 33 fantasy points in his last 5 of 7. And Memphis has struggled against the center spot. They're allowing the 9th most over the last 5 games. They just haven't been getting it done on the defensive side as far as the center spot goes. So I'm totally fine with Adams. And then on the flip side, the same thing with OKC. Jonas Valanciunas at 6.1. He's put up 38 or more fantasy points in his last 4, over 40 fantasy points in his last 3 of 4, 40.3 fantasy points in the same game 3 games ago against OKC already. So Jonas Valanciunas could be the best value at center for the money. He's 6.1, and like I said, he's been smashing that value over his last 4 or 5 games. And he's been doing it in 25-minute increments. So he hasn't really been playing. I think he played 30 minutes one game, and the rest have been between 22 and 25, 26. So Jonas Valanciunas, we know he can smash in short amounts of minutes. The price kind of sucks, but I mean, as far as we want him to see over 30 minutes. But if we get lucky and he does see 30 minutes or so, he could literally put up 55 fantasy points. So good spot for Joe Val. Georgia Dejang, if KAT does not play, he's 5.7. He's been playing really well. You have to look at him, of course, if there is no KAT. DeAndre Jordan at 5.1 just put up 50 fantasy points last game against Atlanta. He's put up 25 or more fantasy points in his last 5 or 6. Gets a small revenge narrative here against New York at home. He did play for the Knicks for half a season before getting traded to Brooklyn. So, whatever you want to call it. But he's still been playing good nonetheless. And he flashed the upside last game against Atlanta, put up 50 fantasy points. So, Dwight Powell at 4.5 is the last center spot I have here as far as value goes. 25 or more minutes in his last 3. He's put up 36.8, 20.8, and 20.8 in his last 3 games. So, if Doncic is out again, he could be a flyer. So, it has been 28 and a half minutes in this pod. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed it. There was a lot to talk about, a lot of good spots. So let's chat about this slate again later. Enjoy your day after Christmas.